Welcome back to Movies TV Mad and Tuesday's edition of the Movies TV Mad Daily. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad and Instagram at Movies TV Mad 555. James Gunn says what I've been saying for a long time, that superhero movies are becoming boring. James Gunn says most superhero movies are boring. The Suicide Squad director James Gunn thinks today's superhero movies are boring and need to take more risks to keep audiences coming back. By Graham Gutman of Screen Rant. Director James Gunn, who helms upcoming DC film The Suicide Squad, says that superhero movies these days are rather boring. Gunn has been enmeshed in various superhero franchises for some time, directing Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014 and introducing the world to that obscure group of heroes. His take on the Cosmic Guardians shot the unknown group into stardom, making them one of the MCU's most successful, if unlikely, groups. Gunn went on to direct Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and executive produced both Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, as well as the upcoming Thor Love and Thunder. Gunn also jumped over to the DCEU after he was briefly fired from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Warner Bros. Immediately called him upon his release from that film, offering Gunn the choice to direct a number of DCEU movies. The director immediately chose to direct the follow-up to 2016 Suicide Squad and his upcoming hybrid sequel reboot, which will release in August. Can I just say to you again, Graham, and all of you at Screen Rant, you can't actually have a sequel reboot. It doesn't make sense. A sequel is a continuation from the first movie. Now, it's not a direct sequel, it's not a direct continuation, but they're using the same characters. So it is a sequel and it's not a reboot. Thank you. So will release in August is one of the most anticipated DC titles in quite some time. In 2023, Gunn will also release Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, slated to start shooting later this year. Gunn is clearly well versed in the world of superhero films, and his latest comments indicate he has some thoughts about the current state of the genre. The director told SFX magazine that he finds many of the superhero films released recently boring. Gunn professes that he loved many of them initially, but that over time they have started to run out of ideas. He admits that not all of them are boring and many are trying to experiment with new things, but Gunn doesn't name any specific films in his comments. They're mostly boring to me right now, laughs. I loved them at the beginning and there are still people trying to do different things with them. So it's not 100% rule, but a lot of them are boring. So I couldn't agree more, James Gunn, and I appreciate you saying this. Gunn's sentiments echo what many have already said. Despite the fact that the director does not name any specific studios or films, it's clear that he's referring to the big two, DC and Marvel, because he couldn't be referring to Marvel on its own, could he, Shield Rant? DC and Marvel, with the latter releasing several films a year over the last decade. Also, the term Marvel formula has become a commonplace in many reviews. DC has been assessed differently, if only because of the messy state of the franchise. Right. Graham, you're going to trigger me a lot in this article, I can see. Forget what you're saying about messy state. The Marvel formula is double talk for fucking boring. Interconnected, right? Interesting franchise with uninteresting movies. Mostly. There's a couple of gems there, but mostly the Marvel formula means fucking boring. It's about the franchise more than the individual film. Is Man of Steel boring? No. Hate it as much as you like, you can't call it boring. Batman versus Superman, is that boring? No. Is Suicide Squad boring? No. Is Wonder Woman boring? No. Is Zack Snyder's Justice League boring? No. Is Shazam boring? No. Is Aquaman boring? No. And they're focused on the individual movie. They're great movies. They're the ones that are going to be remembered in 30 years' time, not the MCU franchise. Still, MCU reviews tend to praise series and movies that break from the so-called formula. Like WandaVision and Loki, still Gunn may be onto something. No, Gunn is onto something. WandaVision was okay, but then mid-season it just became like another Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. And Loki's been okay. It started off slow, but it's definitely the best one from Disney+. Like WandaVision and Loki, still Gunn may be onto something. Some of the most praised superhero films in the last few years have been ones that break from the mould, like Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok is a good movie because the Incredible Hulk's in it. End of story. That's the only good thing about that movie. And Zack Snyder's Justice League, we can't compare one with the other, but Zack Snyder's Justice League is unique and fantastic and certainly not boring. As these mega franchises look to the future though, it's clear that they have taken these assessments into consideration, have they? Taika Waititi, director of Ragnarok, is returning to direct Thor Love and Thunder, and the MCU will continue to inject newness into the franchise by bringing auteur directors like Chloe Zhao and Nia DaCosta. Let's talk about them for a minute, because this basically you brought them in. Yes, they are auteur directors, but basically all they get to decide is where people stand and how the scenery looks behind the characters. They have no authority over story. They have no freedom in these films. It's as simple as that. Yeah, you stand there, do that instead of that. That isn't freedom of creativity. That isn't artistic integrity. So it's all very well bringing auteurs in, but they can't shape the story because Feig's already doing that. So again, you're double bluffing the situation, Graham Gutman. On board for upcoming sequels, Gunn himself has said that the Suicide Squad will take inspiration from many different areas, including classic war films. Maybe his comments will continue to spur a revival of sorts that could see even more originality injected into the genre. Well, to be fair, I can't wait for the Suicide Squad. And look, and what I've seen of it is fantastic, and it's good that he's inspired by war movies. But that isn't necessarily original. It's original for superhero genre. But it's not an original idea. But I don't think many directors these days, bar Snyder, have original ideas. One of that has become a staple of the industry over the last few years. So what you're going to find, obviously, is that access media like Screen Rant are not going to say, oh yes, the MCU is really boring. So what they do is to have some commentary over this subject, because they have to talk about it. They can't ignore it. Is that it's not just the MCU, it's the DCEU. Let's be absolutely clear here that Wonder Woman 84 is a boring movie. Birds of Prey is a boring movie. But that's just two movies. I've named the other movies. That's the great thing about, basically the DCEU has 3 movies I've got no time for. Justice League, which is not even part of my canon anymore for the DCEU, Birds of Prey, and Wonder Woman 84. But despite the shoddy VFX in Justice League and the horrible upper lip CG for Henry Cavill, I would say Justice League is a far superior movie than Birds of Prey and Wonder Woman 84. Although it's just taking its lead from Zack Snyder's Justice League and trying to inject more humour and brighter colour palettes. But Birds of Prey and Wonder Woman 84 are really bad moments within the DCEU. Before that, actually the franchise isn't as messy as Graham Gutman suggests. I've just listed all the great films. You know, Man of Steel is a CBM classic. BVS is a CBM classic. Suicide Squad is a good entertaining time in the cinema. Wonder Woman is a CBM classic. Zack Snyder's Justice League is a CBM classic. Shazam is a really entertaining movie. Aquaman is a CBM classic, especially for the visuals and the commentary in the film as well, about being an outsider and not knowing where to belong. Those films I've just listed are sensational CBMs. Now we look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Iron Man is nowhere near in the quality of Man of Steel, but it's a good solid movie and it launched the MCU. Iron Man 2 is a terrible movie. Incredible Hulk is a great movie, but people don't think so, but it is. Far superior to most of the MCU films. I could go on. Ant-Man and the Wasp, boring, uninspired movies. You know, Thor is solid. Thor 2, The Dark World, a lot of people hate it. And then Thor Ragnarok is a good movie because the Incredible Hulk's in it. Let's be honest, in the Incredible Hulk talks, he's the star of that show. Without the Incredible Hulk, Thor Ragnarok is shit. And the only reason Taika Waititi, Mr. Threesome himself, uses the Hulk in that film is because Feig told him to. He probably wrote the script for the Hulk as well. That was the last time the Hulk was actually great in the MCU. So let's not start listing Thor Ragnarok as a great fucking movie, because I like it because of the Hulk, but everything else is just typical MCU. Let's laugh at this, let's laugh at that. Oh, and it's got a couple of strong females. Let's put that to the forefront and then everyone can forget it's another middling MCU movie. When he talks about superhero movies, he is talking about Birds of Prey. He is talking about Wonder Woman 84, and he's talking about 75% of the MCU. Now, I'm glad he's come out and said this, because this is the fucking truth. This is when Gineas, you know, the superhero Ginea puts money on seats. It puts butts on seats. It's still very popular. It isn't going anywhere, but if they're not careful, they're going to bore fucking people to death, because there's a lot of it now. So you can't have a situation where it's just another MCU movie. Now, that's been the situation for a very long time. Infinity War, Captain America 2 and The Winter Soldier, really, really good films. There's a couple of other good films, but most of them are not CBM classics. I genuinely believe, and I'm a DCEU biased fan and a biased DC fan, I still believe the films that I've listed from the DCEU are CBM classics. That's not including Superman the movie, Superman 2, Superman 3, that's not a classic, but is watchable. Batman, Batman Returns, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises. Pre-DCEU, they are awesome fucking CBMs as well. And Superman Returns is an okay time in the cinema as well. So DC have got a lot of great fucking individual movies that focus on the fucking movie. Say what you want about them. Marvel doesn't have that. Marvel has a very successful, financial successful franchise. That's what Marvel has. It really doesn't have many good movies. You could say Black Panther is an okay movie, actually, pretty good movie, till the third act. The third act just reminded me of Jar Jar Binks in the third act. That was just my opinion, by the way. I'm sure it's not everyone's opinion. Now you know how it feels when you keep on slaughtering Wonder Woman 2017's third act. Wonderful third act, in my opinion. And so Gunn has stumbled upon something very interesting. Gunn's one of these people who just can't help himself. He's always going to say something. But this is a moment of truth, because he's speaking a moment of truth. And of course, a lot of MCU fans and some DC fans who've already tried to cancel him, of course, because they want the Snyderverse to be restored, as do I, but I don't want to cancel a director, a really good director who's proved he can do exciting, brilliant, you know, he's an exhibitionist, James Gunn. That's what he is in real life and with his movies, and that's what the superhero Ginea needs. And without people like that, you've got nothing. And it's like Zack Snyder's films. You know, you can keep on talking to me about Snyder and what you don't like about him and what you don't like about his films. His films look brilliant. They feel brilliant, and they're doing something, and they focus within the movie, but they're also telling kind of a franchise story. That's what Man of Steel and BVS did. It's literally one film. It's beautiful. Suicide Squad continues from BVS. Wonder Woman is its own thing, but it's still continuing from Diana's journey from BVS, although most of the film is a flashback, admittedly. Zack Snyder's Justice League is a continuation of BVS and MOS. It's a shame they couldn't have integrated the Suicide Squad characters as well. That would have been interesting. Otherwise, why have a Suicide Squad movie as your third movie? That's a little bit of a mistake. But ultimately, what Snyder was doing was very unique, very interesting, and never boring. The problem with the MCU, from the Avengers, it stopped being interesting because it was just telling a franchise story. And that brings me to the multiverse strategy that Walter Hamada's been planning since 2018. Very interesting. Now, this is great that everything that's ever been made in DC live action is going to be canon. Everything in the DCEU, everything in Arrowverse, everything else. That's great. But we mustn't become like the MCU. Now, I must just pause this video to read something out from someone. Now, this is from Spoilerman. Now, I like Spoilerman. He does great videos on YouTube, and I like him. But he's obviously more Snyderverse than Central DCEU, the multiverse strategy. This is what he's had to say, and I think it's such a terrible take. This is basically telling everyone that it's pointless seeing every movie, as they don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Marvel had people convinced they'd need to see Captain Marvel to understand Endgame, but DC just out here admitting there's no plan. So this is a terrible take. Now he's commenting on what I did a video about yesterday from Film Updates and EW.com, where Margot Robbie was explaining, actually, and it doesn't seem that Spoiler Man understands what Margot was referring to. Margot was actually referring to her being killed off in Zack Snyder's Justice League Snyder Cut in the nightmare future, and saying, well, just because I'm killed off in that movie, it doesn't mean I can't be in any other movie. It's like the comic books. You can have one issue, then the next issue something else is canon and something else is happening. That's how comic books work. And this is how the DCEU will work going forward with this multiverse strategy. But Spoiler Man decides that the MCU is so much better because they don't do this, and the DCEU and Walter Hamada don't have a plan. This is absolutely biased, fake propaganda, and we see a lot of it. And as you know, I expose a lot of it on Twitter and on here. They do have a plan, but the way you all keep on moaning about artistic freedom and integrity, this is the way it's going to work, right? You know, Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn can be dead in the Snyder Cut because it pretty much is set in the future. It's Elseworld. When Barry reboots the multiverse, all this will be understandable, right? And people won't be as confused, and they won't be able to spread fake propaganda. So basically, when I used to watch the A-Team, Spoiler Man, and they didn't mention the kid they saved the week before, does that mean the A-Team series didn't have a plan? It did have a plan to do self-contained weekly episodes. Now and again, do two-parters, right? Does that mean the A-Team was a horrible series that didn't work? No. Millions upon millions around the world still watch the A-Team. So actually, you have a very, very terrible take. And I love it when they put that MOJ, when they put their face on their head, like they're telling the truth. Like DC and Warner Brothers are in such a mess. And basically, he's showing off that Marvel convinced everyone that Captain Marvel needed to be watched to understand Endgame. Yes, they manipulated and lied to their audience. DC are not doing that within their films anyway. They're being terribly honest that the Suicide Squad, although it's a sequel, it's its own movie. And that's brilliant. There will be a lot of continuing tissues when Barry reboots the multiverse, but there'll still be a lot of films doing their own things, maybe with some post-credit scenes to link in the whole arc of the multiverse strategy. And that's totally fine. But what we've seen from the MCU, and we talk about that Marvel formula, is we've seen a lot of boring films because of that. And DC are trying to avoid this. And I don't think this is a bad thing. And Spoiler Man, I'm sorry, in my opinion, that is a terrible take. But he's got more to say. He then says, if the DCEU movies aren't going to be connected, they are going to be connected after Flashpoint. But he knows that, but he doesn't want to tell you that because he's trying to push, as I say, this fake anti-Hamada Snyderverse propaganda. So if the DCEU movies aren't going to be connected and there's no continuity, then what was the point in scrapping Snyderverse was saying Justice League was canon? Well, the only person who said Justice League is canon is Snyder. Because if you look at the leaks, and I know a lot of the leaks can be fake, a lot of the leaks, you know, when the Flash movie starts, the Snyderverse is actually canon, with Barry actually saying, if I could break the speed of light, as he did in the Snyder Cut, maybe I can do it again to go back in time and warn my parents about what's to happen. So basically, my mum doesn't get murdered and my dad doesn't go in prison. So the beginning of the film will say that basically the Snyder Cut is actually canon to a point. That's interesting. We'll have to wait and see. So again, this is a bad take. He is taking, you see, this is what some of the I'm a Snyder fan from the DCEU movies at least. This is what some Snyder acolytes do. They take something, knowing what it is, they turn it around on its head to move their fake propaganda. So he knows that Margot's talking about being killed off in the Snyder Cut, so he's made a big assumption. Well, it's not an assumption, he's a lie, and he's going with it, that this means the movies won't be interconnected. Once Flashpoint happens, everything will be canon and connected. Some movies will be more self-contained than others, which means it's great for directors to do their own things, you know, especially writer-directors. So, again, terrible take from Spoiler Man. So he goes on, hopefully this kind of thing opens the door for Ben to come back and do a solo movie. Cavill could always do Red Sun, etc, etc. I'm being negative on this, but they could just do a lot more stuff. I just hope they realise we want a Nightmare movie. This is the problem. This is the problem because he, like me, appreciates Zack Snyder's DCEU, but he's going about it the wrong way. You just want, centrally, basically, the Snyderverse. Well, I want it all. I want Walter Hamada's multiverse strategy, and I want Snyder's, Justice League movies and Ben's Batman. And maybe we'll get them, maybe we won't. We definitely got a chance to see Ben's Batman movie, more of a chance than seeing the restoration of the Snyderverse. And that's just the way it is. Now let's discuss DC live action on HBO Max. Now I think we can compare this, of course we can, to the MCU's Disney Plus shows. Now largely, I'm going to give you a great example where basically they're just stringing us along with the MCU projects on Disney Plus. They're entertaining enough. They're okay. I think Loki, as I said earlier, is the best one thus far, and I can't wait for the finale tomorrow. But I don't think we're going to get a great reveal. This is a great example where, they're stringing us along. The big stuff is still only going to happen in the movies. The big reveal's only going to happen in the movies. I don't expect Kang the Conqueror to be revealed. I think Miss Minutes is the villain, and I think lots of people do. And I think she's probably one of Kang's worker horses, if you like. So I don't expect to see him. Maybe they'll mention him. I don't know. It's very interesting. But I think the mentality between, the Disney Plus MCU projects and the DC live action projects on HBO Max have a very different mentality. I think the DC properties are going to deliver big time. Just think about the properties we're getting if you're a DC fan on HBO Max. We're getting Gotham PD, we're getting Peacemaker, we're getting Green Lantern Corps. Now, all these things are going to interconnect with the, outer DCEU or DC live action or the worlds of DC or the multiverse strategy, whatever you want to call it. And I think this gives me a big opportunity to talk about Peacemaker and where it's going to be set. It's obviously a Suicide Squad prequel to James Gunn's Suicide Squad. So, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I believe the time frame is during Man of Steel, BVS, first Suicide Squad, around those times. Now that's interesting because because apparently something really bad is happening. Now it could be very interesting if the invasion of the Kryptonians, Zod and Faora happens at the same time as this series, and what does this mean for Peacemaker? Now we're going to meet Peacemaker's father in this film as well, so he really truly gets an origin. But whether or not I'm right or wrong, but I do believe it's set around BVS and MOS, definitely. And this interconnects the Snyderverse with the outer DCEU and says it's still canon as well, which is very, very interesting. So apparently there's a big sci-fi threat, a science fiction threat element in the Peacemaker show. Again, this is very intriguing. As I say, it's a prequel. It's probably set at the beginning of the DCEU. So it makes sense that maybe Zod and the invasion may have some kind of consequences on Peacemaker's origin story and forms him to be, the toxic person that he becomes, and gives him this mentality, that he wants to get peace at any cost, no matter how many people have to die to get it. That's interesting. So I'm really looking forward to Peacemaker. And as James Gunn's already said, this is in the outer, it's in the DCEU itself. So you could hear lots of references, Easter eggs, and definitely cameos. Sounds like a very expensive show. So this is evidence to me that Peacemaker, Gotham PD, and the Green Lantern Corps are going to be very expensive shows, but also shows of their own making that are part of a shared universe, but are not tugging you along until you watch the movies. So this is very exciting. This is why I truly believe, in terms of not just what DC's doing on HBO Max, but the multiverse strategy, I believe that all of this could potentially blow the Marvel Cinematic Universe out of the water. Now, I don't know. I can only tell you what I've seen and what people have told me. And everything I hear from people about the Flash movie, for example, is very exciting. So we are heading to a very exciting future Whether people embrace it and we attract the broader audience here is anybody's guess. But I do think this is a great original take. What they're doing with Peacemaker, very exciting. And they want everything to connect, but not in a boring way when we talk about that Marvel formula, but in a very exciting way, because people love crossovers and connections and Easter eggs, but people also like a movie or a TV show, especially a streaming show, to be their own thing, as well as being proud and sharing, you know, the full DCEU universe, or whatever universe or franchise you're a part of. And I think that's very, very exciting for the future of DC live action. Right, we move on to Arrowverse, and of course everything's going to be connected from Flash, don't forget. But we are celebrating the return of Jay Garrick to the Arrowverse. The Flash, what Jay Garrick's post-crisis return means for Arrowverse's future. Jay Garrick is officially returning to the Arrowverse through the Flash, but what does this mean for the franchise's future in a post-crisis era? By Andy, whose surname I can never pronounce, so I'm not going to try. Jay Garrick is finally coming back to the Flash, but what does his return mean for the future of the Arrowverse following Crisis on Infinite Earths? While John Wesley Shipp's Flash from Earth 90 sacrificed himself in the last major crossover, his time in the franchise was far from over. Even though his version of Barry Allen is dead, Shipp also betrays the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick. However, since his last appearance in The Flash Season 6, his fate was unknown until the news came out that Jay would be back, but on a different Arrowverse series. For Stargirl Season 2, Shipp will appear in the 9th episode that will retroactively establish Jay officially coming from Earth 2 rather than Earth 3. Before Jay makes his Stargirl debut, Shipp will return to The Flash for its 150th episode. While the trailer only showed Jay briefly taking on the Godspeed Army, it's safe to say he'll be a crucial player in helping Barry and the Flash family defeat the Speedster villain once and for all. As exciting as it'll be to see Jay's comeback, there are a couple of critical questions that the Arrowverse will need to address, especially post-crisis. While it's clear this will be the same Jay that Team Flash had come to know since The Flash Season 2, how much has his life changed post-crisis, now that he's on Earth 2? The only confirmed information about his Stargirl episode is that he'll be part of an important Justice Society flashback story. However, it wasn't specified if Jay's alive in the present or not on Earth 2. Since he's appearing on The Flash again, Jay's definitely not dead. That creates a different mystery, because while Earth Prime doesn't know about the multiverse still existing exactly, it's unclear if people on other Earths do. But this is interesting because Barry Allen, Grant Gustin, does know that the multiverse exists, because he met with the DCEU's Earth 1 Barry Allen, Ezra Miller. So it's interesting that he knows, but he doesn't seem to have spread that, or because I don't really watch Flash these days, maybe he has, but it seems that nobody else has been told this, which is interesting. Since Jay's travelling from one Earth to another, the Flash's 150 episode will need to establish why he hasn't shown up sooner after Crisis on Infinite Earths. It'd especially be weird if Jay has had all of his pre-crisis memories since Earth 2 was recreated, but didn't let Team Flash know he and his wife Joan were still alive. Well, maybe he hasn't got all his memories, so that's a good reason, smart ass. Is there perhaps a JSA reason that prevented Jay from visiting Earth Prime? While that's a mystery itself, Jay's return raises another question for the Arrowverse's future. Since they didn't know that Oliver Queen recreated the multiverse, will this be when they finally discover that Earth Prime isn't the only world to exist? They need to find out, and the sooner the better. But obviously in the Flash movie, everyone's going to find out about this anyway. Ever since the Arrowverse introduced the multiverse through the Flash, that has always been one of the strongest storytelling devices in the franchise. It's also inevitable that the Arrowverse heroes would at some point learn that there is still a multiverse post-crisis. It'd only be natural for the Flash characters to be the first ones to learn about it, since their show introduced it in 2015. As Jay reunites with his allies on the Flash, his Arrowverse return will hopefully address all these mysteries before Stargirl Season 2. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the advantages of the multiverse strategy. Because what happens is, when you do a flashpoint or a reboot or you recreate the multiverse like Oliver Queen did, people can forget, they can be put on other Earths. It's very interesting. So this is the situation with the Snyder characters as well. They can be put on an Elseworld when, you know, Barry reboots the multiverse in the Flash movie. So you can, you know, characters can be realigned in other places. They can have other dynamics. They can be partnered with other characters. This is very interesting. But I've always been, even though I don't watch the Flash anymore, I've always been interested in the 150th episode, because I think this will have a link to what they're doing with the Flash movie. Don't forget, everything's going to be connected, including Arrowverse, which is really, really exciting. That brings me to my next point, talking about Arrowverse. So, pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths, Tom Welling and Erica Durance were signed up to reprise their Smallville roles. We know what ensued and what happened. You know I don't see it as Smallville canon. Deciding to make Clark Kent and not Superman anymore because he wants to stay at home with the family is a stupid, dumb move, because Clark Kent is powerful enough and fast enough to be a father, a husband, and a superhero. Imagine if they did this to Lois Lane and said you can't be a reporter anymore because you've got a family. It would be deemed as sexist, wouldn't it? As it would be. But it's okay for Superman to be domesticated and not be Superman anymore. It was a dumb move, and Berlanti's obsessed with this, and it was terrible. But that's not my point. My point is they approached Michael Rosenbaum to reprise his Smallville Lex Luthor role. He said no. They didn't tell him what money he would be getting and what he would be doing. Both things are deal breaker for Michael. You see, Michael Allen Miles created a brilliant version of Lex Luthor. In my opinion, the best live-action version of Lex Luthor we've ever seen. And Michael's not going to come in and allow them to destroy what Alan Miles created. And of course, the money's important as well. Of course, why wouldn't it be? He didn't even know where he'd be shooting. It was ridiculous. And it's very interesting that Michael said no to it. He was the wisest person on the block, and it shows he just doesn't do things for money. I mean, he's pretty much just doing his Inside of You podcast these days, and some shows, and kind of getting the Smallville cast together to do cons together. So it just shows you that Michael Rosenbaum is a man of integrity, and that makes me respect him even more than I already did. And finally today, I just want to say this very, very briefly before we sign off for today's Movies TV Mad Daily. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed bringing you all the updates and giving you my opinions on the DCEU and the comic book genre in general. We need to stop talking about the MCU. I'm fed up of the MCU. I get depressed hearing about the MCU. I'm pretty much bored of it now. Of course, I'm still going to watch the stuff and embrace the stuff. But I'm fed up of reading reports about it and hearing how great it is and how much money it's making. Listen, there is an exciting plan going on for DC live action. I'm embracing it. I'm looking forward to it. And I believe that not that you should if you don't want to, but if you do want to, you are going to have something so rewarding, something very exciting is happening. Because when companies need an audience, they will do what an audience wants. You're going to see this with James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, Aquaman, The Batman, all of them, and the HBO Max shows as well. We have something very exciting coming, something for everyone. And I can't wait for everyone to see this stuff and embrace this stuff. As a DC fan, I'm very excited. And I can assure you, you are going to be very excited as well. Comment down below, like, share and subscribe. Remember, please subscribe and hit that little notification bell so you never miss this perfection. And I will see you in the next video. See you again soon.